Welcome to a complete beginner's guide to the Create mod. I have easily spent over 1,000 hours in the Create mod, and I would consider myself an expert. However, I know that a lot of my viewers and a lot of people in general have either never played it or never really spent a bunch of time in the Create mod, which is where this video comes in. This video is intended to act as a kind of just tutorial of how to start with the Create mod, things that you should focus on building, and you could either follow along or just watch just to learn a little bit of the basics of how to get started, how to automate things in a relatively efficient manner. This is assuming that you've played any bit of Minecraft before, whether it's vanilla or not, just so that you know the base items and things in the original game. This video will have a bunch of chapters, so you can skip around to things that you need to learn, or if you want to just pass things that you already know, you can do that. As soon as you start your game, it's just basic Minecraft. There's nothing that you can do other than go punch a tree. You need to get some food and enough tools and things to get into the mines. You can do this as quick or as slow as you want. If you want to build a house first, you obviously can. Once we head into the mines, this is where kind of the main part of the Create mod actually starts kicking in. Eventually, you'll get down to a cave and start getting your first sets of ores. There is one new ore in the Create mod, and that is zinc ore. Zinc is used for quite a bit of different materials and crafting ingredients, so you will absolutely need it. You'll also need copper and iron just as much. Things like gold, coal, redstone are all also pretty useful, so I'd recommend getting those, but they are much less important than the main three: iron, copper, and zinc. Something that you might not think you need until you actually need it is andesite. This is one of the main components in the Create mod as well. It is kind of on par with iron, zinc, and copper, except it's probably more useful to get as much of it as you can, since you use this a ton for a bunch of different crafting recipes. Once you have your first bit of resources, you might find diamonds. These are not super helpful in the Create mod, but of course they are amazing for tools and armor, so definitely pick those up. After a successful mining session and you have all of the items that you might need, now it's time to move on to the Create mod parts. The first step in getting started with the Create mod is generating your first source of power. There are 4 power generation methods: water wheels, large water wheels, windmills, and steam engines. Water wheels are kind of the intro and most basic version of a power source, so we're gonna make those first. Likely, you'll have this mod over here called JEI in your mod pack. If you left click on a thing, it'll tell you the recipe for it. Same with right clicking, except it'll tell you what you can make with that item. So to make a water wheel, we need planks and a thing called a shaft. This is going to be one of the 2 first create components that we make. The first one is andesite alloy, which is used to make shafts. To make an andesite alloy, we just need iron nuggets and andesite. So we're gonna grab our andesite, make some iron nuggets, and get started on making our first andesite alloy. You obviously don't need a stack like what I'm making right now. You can definitely make as much as you can with it, and that will be fine. Once we have some andesite alloy, let's make a couple shafts, and then we're gonna need a bit of wood, make a chest, put a shaft in the center for our first water wheel. Now is also a good time to get a bucket, since we're going to need water to actually power this thing. We can't just put a water wheel on the water like this because the water isn't moving. Instead, we're going to need to place it on the top so that it flows over the water wheel, actually moving and generating power here. Once that's spinning, we can see that the shaft inside of here is spinning, and if we connect up a shaft to it, it will start spinning as well. This is our first and initial source of power. How do we use this thing though? That is going to be the next step. And before we go crazy making a bunch of contraptions, it's worth getting 2 kind of necessary components that just make the Create mod a little bit easier to deal with. These 2 things are called engineer's goggles and a wrench. Both of these are super helpful for different reasons, but as you can see, they require golden sheets, which we don't know how to make. The beautiful thing about JEI is that if you left click on a golden sheet, you can see that we need to press gold ingots with a mechanical press, which we don't have, into golden sheets. We already have gold, we kind of just need this mechanical press. If you click this up on the top left here, you can see what we need to make this thing. We have shafts, we can make blocks of iron, we don't have andesite casings. So let's get started on casings. There are 4 base types of casings in the Create mod, and each create a different kind of age of items. Andesite casings make andesite aged items, brass casings, brass age, copper casing, copper age. We're just making the andesite casing, so let's start with that. As you can see, there are two ways to do it: manual item application and a thing called a deployer. We're gonna skip the deployer and go straight to manual item application. What we're seeing here is that we need a stripped log of any type and then right click it with an andesite alloy and we'll get an andesite casing. So let's place down a few logs, strip them, and then we need to grab our andesite alloy and right click it. And there we go, we have our first sets of andesite casing. As a reminder, we're still building our mechanical press. So let's get a block of iron, and then we have the other two things that we need, and we have our mechanical press. In order to power the mechanical press, we need to hook it up to this water wheel here. If you place it next to the shaft or the water wheel itself, you'll see that it now starts spinning. There is kind of a problem, however. How do we make this press stuff? Unfortunately, since we're in water, this won't work like this, because if we just throw in a gold ingot under here, it's too high up already. So instead, we need to move this mechanical press up a little bit. And that is where the other kind of base create mod components come in. There are a ton of create components that we can use for this: gearboxes, encased chain drives, belts, or cogwheels. And they all do slightly different things. We're not going to get into exactly what they are right now, but let's start with the gearbox. As you can see, this water wheel is spinning this way. If we're looking at it, it would spin like a clock. On the other side of the gearbox though, you could see that it is spinning the opposite direction, which means that the gearbox will invert whatever power signal is coming from the other side. You can also notice on the left side of this gearbox, it is spinning towards us, and on the right side, it's spinning away. So those sides are also inverted. We can also, in our inventory, in the crafting terminal, convert these to vertical gearboxes. Vertical gearboxes are basically the same, except you can see that there's no shafts on the side, but instead they are on the top. Again, they do invert things, and if we place another vertical gearbox here, you can see that this side now inverts back to the original direction, which can be used in a lot of contraptions. We can now put in our mechanical press, grab a little dirt block just so that it can actually press stuff, and let's throw in our gold ingots. We'll see now that this is slowly pressing stuff into golden sheets. Once all four of those have finished, we can now make the two things that we need. Let's first start with the engineer's goggles. You'll need glass and string for this, and then we'll go to the wrench. We do need a stick, so stick and the wrench. I always leave the wrench in my second hotbar slot. Depending on how you play, you can always change that. As for the goggles, these need to be placed on my head. And when we do that, you can see a lot of stuff starts to pop up on the screen, including the kinetic stress and stats of a block. You can see if we hover over this generator, it has the kinetic stress capacity of 256 SU. SU is kind of the power that it uses. So instead of watts or kilowatts like we do in real life, it instead has SU, which stands for stress units. The mechanical press, the kinetic stress impact is 64 SU. This means it is using 64 out of the 256 stress units that is possible from this thing. I've talked about why we need the engineer's goggles, but why do we need the wrench? The wrench is super helpful in kind of doing smaller configuration changes to the create components. If you right click a side of a gearbox with a wrench, you can see that the faces switch. If we flick the other side, it is now inverted like so. So we can right click those around. If you right click a mechanical press on any of the sides, it doesn't do anything. But if you do it on the bottom or the top, it will rotate it around. And I recommend you try this on a bunch of different contraptions because I can't list all of them, but something is usable in every situation, including, I guess, water wheels. Who knew? Anyway, the last real useful use for it is if you shift right click, you can pick stuff up and it'll go straight into your inventory. So you don't need to like break stuff and go run and pick it up. You could break stuff over a void. You'll be good. Now that we have the basics of stress unit and rotation manipulation under our belts, we need a starter house. We are going to be doing this in a few different parts. First, I'm going to explain to you what all the components behind me are before we get into building the starter base or any of the machines itself. If you know what all these components are already and just want to skip to that part, just look in the chapters and it should be something titled like making our starter base. So to talk about what things we need to know to make this starter base, we're going to start over here. These are shafts. I actually don't think I talked about them, but shafts are really easy. They transmit power. I'm going to be using a thing called a creative motor, which, believe it or not, is only available in creative, and it just provides provides infinite stress units. This is used for testing. You might see this in schematics and stuff. We'll talk about schematics later, but they're just a power source that you could connect power to if you're playing in creative, and you could change the rotational speed. So for shafts, they spin in a normal direction. They follow the direction of whatever's powering them. These can connect up to gearboxes or cogs in kind of the way you would expect. You could put a cog on the end of it and it'll spin like this, and the same with a gearbox. The first item transportation thing that I want to go over are belts. If you connect two shafts up with a belt, it will connect them both and make this opposite one spin, even though it's not directly connected to a power source. You can right click on a belt with a belt to increase the length by 1. You have to click on the end of it. And then if you right click it with a wrench, it'll decrease the length. Let's increase it by 1. If you put a shaft in the middle, it will add that there. So then you can build off of this. And if you just right click, not shift right clicking that shaft, that'll break it. If you right click the belt, it'll break the whole belt. And that is also the case if you have a shaft in the middle. So now that we have a belt, if we put an item on it, you can see that it continues along the belt. We use this in some of the future automation things. The other kind of item thing is a depot. You see it over here while we're smelting stuff. The depot, if you right click, you can put an item on it. And it's also true if you put an item on a belt, it'll drop it and deposit it onto a depot. The next thing I'm going to go over are funnels. Funnels can interact with an inventory and will let you drop out or pick up items to go in or out of that inventory. They can go on any side of a block, on the sides, under it, or above it. You can see that there's a little arrow here, and that depicts where the item is heading. If you normal right click on an item like a barrel, it'll have the arrow pointing upward. If you shift right click, it'll go downward. If you right click it with a wrench, it'll flip that arrow. And this is the same for the brass version. For most of these things, there is a brass alternative that is a little bit better, and let's explain why. You can see immediately that this one doesn't have a little square up here while this one does. This is the filter, and we'll get into that later, but you could put items or list filters into this filter, and you can also change the quantity of which you drop stuff out. Chutes are very similar. You can put them underneath a block, and it will, if we put an item in there, drop the thing out of the chute. It is basically a one-way funnel. These are a little bit better in circumstances. Funnels, by default, will only drop out one item at a time, at least the andesite funnels, and will not continuously drop items if there is an item in the way. Chutes, on the other hand, can drop stacks of items at a time and will just continue dropping it. They don't care if there's an item already there. It's really useful for farms when you need items to sit here, but then get picked up once they change, like if they're being smoked or something. Normal chutes have a max item capacity of 16, so it can only drop out 16 items at a time, while the fancier brass version can do full stacks. That is a little bit different from the andesite funnels, as these can only drop one out at a time, while the brass funnels can drop out a whole stack. Tunnels are kind of the last one in this list of belt-based thingies. They have a very similar design to the andesite funnels, and they're not very useful. Andesite tunnels by themselves will let you basically switch where you're dropping things out of, but not really. They're kind of stupid. In order to make an andesite funnel work properly, and if you want it to make a right turn, you need to do something like this. I honestly have no reason why an andesite funnel even exists. They're just stupid because you can do the same thing without one. I don't get why they exist. Brass funnels, however, can be used for something. They have filters on the outside, and if you connect them up like this, they will actually, even if you enter items from the same belt, will split them out among the belts. You can change that option here, and there are a couple different ones. We've seen split. Force split is just forcing that. Round robin is it goes through this one, then this one, then this one. Prefer nearest just goes through the closest one. And then the last two, randomize and synchronize inputs. Randomize, well, first you just do a random line, and then synchronize inputs is they all let one out at the same time. They're kind of stupid, and there's always a way to bypass tunnels. I don't think I've ever used them in any of my designs because they're just annoying to deal with. Now let's get to basins and mixers. Basins have a lot of uses. You can see that they are used in a bunch of different types of crafting recipes, including compacting, mixing, auto shapeless crafting, packaging, and brewing, which is actually really interesting. They are basically just a holder for liquids and items. You can see already that even though we have no funnel on here, if we create an item, it looks like it'll drop out onto a belt. This is also true for depots. As you can see here, it'll just drop it out onto the depot, which is a really cool feature. The reason it's a cool feature is because we can have it drop out onto the depot and then have a funnel going straight in, basically meaning we can have two funnels on the same block, compacting things a little bit nicer. Remember in JEI that you can check out all the crafting recipes that you want for this. There's also a filter option on this, along with the brass funnels and other things like that. We'll get into this a little bit later, because it's not super necessary for this little system, but soon it will be. So as I mentioned, basins themselves had a lot of functionality, but they have to be paired with either a mixer or a press. We have both of these in our system that I'm going to talk about later, but basically you can make one of the crafting ingredients like wheat, flour, and water to make dough. It'll drop it out onto a depot or item next to it, and you'll be good to go. If you wanted to, you could put a funnel next to it, but that'll drop out some of the ingredients, which is not helpful. So you'll need a filter on this if you want it to actually work. And since we can't have filters on andesite funnels, you'll have to wait to the brass age. Mixers and presses are the next thing to go over. Mixers, as you can see, mix things up. They're just kind of check out the recipes. If you need to, you could put a blaze burner under here for the ones that require blaze burners. If you need to, you could put a blaze burner underneath the basin physically, and that will create all the recipes that require a blaze burner underneath. I'll go over exactly how to do that when we get to brass making, but that's kind of the gist. For pressing, the same is true. You can put a blaze burner under here if you want. Compacting basically lets you do anything that you need in JEI under the compacting tab, like iron trapdoors or iron blocks. Pressing is a little bit different. I have this setup here where we're using a belt and 2 andesite funnels with a press. There are interesting things with presses and assembly lines, as well as using some of the other materials in the later game, like a deployer or something. If you have it on a belt, as you can see, the belt will stop, wait for the mechanical press to press, and then it will continue on and get stored into this barrel. If you wanted to do the same thing, but it end with a depot instead of a belt, you can see that when we try this, it'll get picked up by the funnel immediately. So if you want things to work on an assembly line, you're going to have to use a belt system fully so that the andesite funnel will know that there's a belt and there's a whole process that is going on, and to wait for this thing to finish pressing before it picks up the item. The final 2 blocks that we need to go over are encased fans and saws. Saws are actually a little bit interesting. You can see that this seems to be spinning in this direction, but if we throw an item on it, you can see that it goes in the other direction. If I slow this down, it might be easier to see, but let's say we throw an item on this, it's going to go the opposite direction of whatever way this is spinning. So make sure you test them before you actually put it on. You can also see that this thing is powerable from below. So you could power it from below without having to bring it up or do anything weird like that. An encased fan is kind of just a fan. It can push you slowly or faster depending on the rotation speed, and it can face upward. When blowing upward, the rotation speed will basically tell the player how much they're able to go up. If it's set to a low enough one, they won't fly up, but if it's set to a high enough value, they will get taken up into the air. You can also have encased fans bring items upward with a chute. If I put on engineer's goggles and hover over this, you can see that fans pushing from below moves items upward. That means if we put an input funnel in here and then throw an item, you can see that it pops up at the top. You will also notice that the fan no longer pushes entities or items up once there are chutes in the way. And those are all of the items that we care about for right now. We will eventually go over kind of the more advanced ones, but let's get back to figuring out all the items and contraptions that you need for your starter base. So here are all the things that I would recommend having in your starter base. You can obviously throw in other miscellaneous farms or things that make precision mechanisms or other things like that. If you don't know what I'm saying, don't worry about it. It doesn't matter. But let's start over here. We want all of the basic kind of useful ingredients here, like a smithing table, grindstone anvil, crafting table, enchanting table, and stone cutter, just for your basic item making needs. And then moving on to our first create contraptions here. We're first obviously going to need a power generation unit. You can use water wheels, you can use windmills. Since we're not at the brass age yet, we can't use steam engines, but these 2 large water wheels can power everything in this area, including things that are much later game. So you could just go 2 large water wheels. You will, however, have to speed it up for things like the mixers to be working. Let's start with the easier ones. This first one is a compacting setup. There are probably better recipes for this, but let's just say we put in a bunch of iron ingots in here. Those will get dropped out into the basin, and then once we hit 9, this will start pressing. Oh, and there it is, fixed it. This will start pressing, and once it finishes pressing, we will get something that we don't want. This is because we don't have filters, but we'll explain filters in a minute. You can also make iron blocks depending on the filter that you set, and it'll output in here. Obviously, if this were a faster speed, it would be much easier to do. You could also have a space underneath saved for if you put a blaze burner there, because certain recipes require a compacting under a blaze burner. The next is pressing. The next thing I would recommend getting is a thing called pressing. This is actually used in a lot of different machines and farms, and it will just let you automatically press whatever item it is into the flat version of that. You can see that as soon as it gets to here, it will squish it up, and then once it heads into the barrel, we will get pressed iron. There we go. We have the iron sheet that we need. Iron sheets and gold sheets are, and among other things, are used in a bunch of different crafting recipes, so it is kind of necessary to get one of these types of systems set up. And our final and probably the most complicated one in the basic setup of the Andesite Age is a mixing setup. You can see that we have an empty gap here, and that is on purpose. Eventually we'll want a blaze burner here that we can then power with lava to mix and heat up the mixture while we're making it. Over on this side, we have a water input and output valve here that you can turn on and off. That is, of course, optional. And if you don't have copper or the things to make certain things like this fluid valve, then we could just wait on that. I will be going over the fluid pipes and valves and all the copper stuff right before we get into the brass age, so you can skip to that part if you want to set this up and you don't know what's going on, but this isn't super important in the early game. What you really care about is having a mixer and then an automated thing over here. Honestly, the thing that I use it most for in my world is with wheat flour. Unfortunately, this does have a speed requirement, which means we need to have this spinning at least 32 RPM for this to work. There we go. Once that's sped up, we can see that it'll mix us, our wheat flour and water, into the dough and get placed into this barrel. This is a really cool setup where it just kind of cascades downward and in. I would also recommend having a smoking, heating, cooking, and washing setup in here. You're not going to be able to get soul campfires or the soul haunting version until we go to the nether. But for things like wheat flour, what we can do is just wash that. It'll turn it into dough, just like the mixer over there. There we go. So we have dough. You can also place a whole stack on the depot, and it's a little bit easier just to do everything. This is kind of the main setup that is used in a lot of other content creators things. I don't really like the depots, but it is really easy and quick to set up in the early game. And then the final one here is just for sawing. If you look up the recipe for shafts, you can see that one andesite alloy gives you 6 shafts on a saw, which is marginally better than the base crafting recipe. So it is kind of beneficial to just put this in and have it run while you're doing other stuff, because then you'll come back with 2 more shafts per andesite alloy than you would if you just crafted all of them up, which does stack up pretty quickly. The last 2 here are crushing wheels, which we're not able to get yet. Crushing wheels require us to craft them in mechanical crafters, which, if we look those up, require the brass age. So I'm just leaving the smart chutes here because they can go up to stacks of 64. As I mentioned, normal chutes can only go to 16. And then the mechanical crafters, which, as we already mentioned, require brass. Once we get to them, I'll let you know when you can put them in. And this is probably the setup that I would do. Chutes are a little bit easier. They make it so that you won't have items despawn if you leave the area, which is really helpful. I've also just thrown in a stressometer. You can treat it like it's a shaft, and this will just tell you how close you are to overstressing the system, and if that's the case, you can add more water wheels or windmills or whatever else. So you can set this up in any configuration that you want. Again, if you don't really know how to do it, just look at what we're doing here. We're just dropping stuff into the basins or onto the belts, and then having things move along with us. Remember that basins can drop out onto depots just by being next to them, and then you can put a funnel next to it to pick it up into a chest. Now that we have our basic starter house farms and machines, let's get to something a little bit more specific: filters. Filters can be placed on anything with this little square thingy on it. So smart chutes, brass funnels, basins, and a couple of other items have these things, including saws, and they are mostly used to filter stuff out. If we were to put in stripped oak logs, and oak planks into this barrel, you'll see that they all get transported to this bottom one. But let's say we only want oak planks to go down. So we're going to put oak planks in that filter, and then we're going to put all 3 in. You'll see that oak logs and stripped oak logs will stay up here, while the planks come down here. But what happens if we want both of these logs to go down and the planks to stay up? That is where a list filter comes in. For a list filter, we can shift click in the 2 things that we want. You can also just click and drag if you want, whatever you want to leave in here. You're also able to drag and drop from JEI if you don't have the item itself. This is useful when you're making experience or potions and you need the bottle version of a potion that you don't have yet. There are 4 options down at the bottom here, and we'll go over them really quickly. First is a deny list. When you have a deny list set and you put it into the filter of the smart chute, it is going to deny everything on this list. Since we have oak logs and stripped oak logs on the list, it's going to deny entry from those 2, leaving only the oak planks going through. If we put in other things, everything else will also be transferred through. If we switch this to allow list, then it's only going to allow the things in the list filter. If we put that back, we can see that all the things that just were able to go through are not able, and only the 2 log types are able to go through. We then have respect data and ignore data. Respecting data will allow you to put things with different durabilities, like a half-used bow or something else, maybe a fully used sword with only 1 HP left on it. And if that's the case, it will allow that to go through, but normal full swords will not go through. This can be useful in certain circumstances, like if you have a deployer killing a thing automatically, and then the sword gets low, you can use this respect data for when the sword is low enough, it takes it out of the deployer for you. And then ignore data is going to be the default. It's just matching the item itself. It doesn't care about the MBT value or anything like that. The other filter, which you've maybe seen in my inventory, is an attribute filter. This one is a little bit fancier as it requires brass to be able to craft, and you can see it has a very different UI. The first thing we notice is that we need to add a reference item. So let's put in an oak plank. You can also drag and drop from JEI into this as well. You can see that as soon as we do that, this changes to is placeable. If you scroll around, you can change this to a different tag. So by default, things in Minecraft are tagged with different descriptions. Since this is an oak log, it is tagged as a placeable item because it's placeable. It could be used as furnace fuel. It could be smelted. It can be tagged as a Minecraft log that burns. It can be oak logs, nor a full list of logs in the building blocks section, natural blocks section, or was added to by Minecraft. There are a bunch of different options here, but let's do Minecraft logs. Over on this side, we can add that attribute, or we can add the inverse. You've seen what the deny and allow list does. If we were to add this attribute and we put it in the funnel, we would be able to drop oak through. If we deny it, then we'll be able to drop everything but oak. Let's add this to the attribute list. And as you can see, this number has now changed to 1 instead of 0, and the selected attributes are now tagged as Minecraft logs. If we put that in here, we should be able to see that oak logs go through, but oak planks do not. If we put in stripped oak logs, those also go through, and that is because stripped oak logs count as logs. No, you don't. Oh, that was weird. Where did they go? Anyway, you can also add additional tags to this list. If we throw in a lead, you can see in the tools, in the group tools and utilities, let's add this attribute as well. When we've done that, you can now see that the selected attributes are things that are tagged as Minecraft logs and things that are in the group tools and utilities. And this is where these three come in. When you have multiple, or if you want to deny things, you can choose between one of these three. The first one, allow list of any, means that any of the tagged attributes are allowed to pass. So this means we can put in logs, those will go through, and leads will go through, but things like leather and oak planks will not. That is because leads are tagged as tools and the logs are tagged as logs. If we, however, change this to an allow list of all, this will only allow items that are both Minecraft logs and a tool and utility. We should see that nothing now goes through because there's no such thing as an item that is a tool and also a log. And then the final one is a deny list. This will deny anything that is in these tags. So if we put this in and we put in a lead, it won't go through. The same with logs, but as soon as we put in something that isn't on the list, those will drop through. So there's a lot of cool configurations you can do with this. As I mentioned, you can pull out items from a basin with a brass funnel if you want, because then it will drop out full stacks at a time. You just need to set a filter for it. It's also used in a bunch of other contraptions to either pick up, let's say, items that you're smelting, to put it in a chest for you, or to do a bunch of other things. With those two out of the way, let's get to farms. The create mod lets you automate basically anything that grows legitimately, you can automate. And it's way easier than vanilla Minecraft. We're going to start with items called mechanical harvesters, but first we're going to focus on minecarts and contraptions. Contraptions are basically flying machines, at least in the vanilla version of Minecraft, but a lot easier and you don't need to make them fly. We're going to grab just some powered rails. We're going to put a block behind it so that the minecart will be able to move. And then we're going to get something called a cart assembler. This is just made with redstone, any warped wood, and andesite alloy. And if we place it on top, you can see that we have this little contraption doohickey with an arrow pointing that way. When it's pointing that way, it just means that whatever we're building is going to be facing in this direction. If you hover on the side and hold right click, you can see that there are 3 movement options, which is always face towards motion, pause actors while rotating, and lock rotation. They are all used for different things, but for most, and this farm included, we're going to set it to lock rotation. If we put a minecart underneath, you can see that nothing happens, but let's put a block on top. I'm going to do a barrel just so that it can store all of the crops that we harvest once we get to that point. If we then power this block, including the cart assembler and the rails, you could see really briefly that the barrel pops up. And if we right click the barrel, you can see that it is called a moving barrel now. If we break this block and push this cart along, it's now connected to the minecart itself. If we turn off this lever, you can see that it's still connected. And if we push it back over the cart assembler, it will turn it back into its normal full blocks. And let me just place this block back down. We can mess with this as we would normal Minecraft. If you did notice, even though we turned this lever on and there was a powered rail directly below that minecart, this rail does not turn on. We need to separately power the normal rails that are not connected to a cart assembler. So I'm going to put levers over here, and then we're just going to build powered rails a little bit of ways along, and then we're going to put a block on the other side. Now, to actually farm stuff, we're going to need to just place in a few blocks. I'm using barrels just so that we can have storage for all the things that we're mining. And then I'm also going to go all the way along here. The reason for this is because we need to place in mechanical harvesters, which is this block here. It is made pretty simply. We know how to make all of these ingredients, and this will help us harvest all the materials. I'm now going to set up just a normal farm, and we're going to leave this harvester area blank. But once we place in all of these, we're basically done. Yeah, that's the end of the farm. The farm is done. And I'm actually going to scooch this one over. What's going to happen here is that this minecart assembly, once we connect it up and do all that fun stuff, is going to move across here. The mechanical harvesters will automatically harvest whatever crops that we have here, place them back down, and give us all the loot in these barrels back here. I'm going to grab seeds and just plant in a bunch of these here. And just for demonstration purposes, I'm also going to grab some sugarcane over here to show you that you can also harvest sugarcane. The reason we're skipping a block on the sugarcane is because these things can't place back sugarcane for whatever reason. So we're just doing one block higher over here. So now if we turn this thing on, it will still only connect the one block that is on top of it. And that is because there is a little glue thing, like you would a sticky piston, directly on top of this block, but not anywhere else. So how are we supposed to glue everything together? That's a great question. There is a thing called superglue. Superglue lets you glue a certain amount of blocks together, and then it will make a little square thing here. For contraptions and for harvesters in particular, what we'll need to do is glue this barrel over to this far one. What will happen now, if we turn this thing on, is this whole top row will turn into movable blocks. You can also notice that this harvester is now a part of the contraption. The harvester is one of the only blocks that you don't also have to glue to the contraption itself. As you can see, there's no glue bits here, but since the harvester is like meant to be a part of contraptions, it just lets you do that. We also need this bottom row here, so I bet you can figure out what we need to do. A little one of those, and now if we try to turn this thing on, you can see the whole thing lifts up a little bit. So now we're going to break that block and move our thing across. And as you can see, it is going already. What we can do also, now that the cart assembler is there, we can actually, oh, I broke it. When this happens, you don't have to like break the minecart and do everything over again. If you shift right click with a wrench, it'll pick up the whole thing in your inventory. Now we just need to place it back in the same direction that it was facing, and then we can send it off again. If you shift right click the cart assembler, it'll destroy it, and now you have a little bit prettier of an area. If I increase the random tick speeds so that we actually get stuff growing, you can see that they are automatically being harvested pretty much all the time. And if we hover over this minecart contraption, we can see in some scenarios that we have a bunch of sugarcane, wheat, and wheat seeds in these barrels here. So now if we turn this thing off, we should be able to, at least in one of the barrels here, see all the stuff that we've been harvesting. And that's kind of it for these micro farms. They are really easy to set up, and we can upgrade this. We do need to, however, put back the cart assembler. Make sure you set it to lock rotation. And once that's in, we should have the actual blocks that we want. If you want to get rid of glue, you just have to left click on the glue section and it'll get rid of it. But we're going to keep it for now. The other thing kind of that you can do with a contraption other than harvesters are saws. Saws, believe it or not, are used for sawing things. What do you saw? Trees. You cut down trees. You also can saw cactus if you're using that. So it'll work very similar to if you were doing cactus, but we're gonna do trees here because I think that's fun. We will need to plant our saplings manually for the time being because we don't have enough money or brass for a thing called the deployer, which will let you plant stuff automatically. But for now, that's fine. Let's place in all of our saplings, and I still have the random tick rate up to 1,000,000. Let's lower this back down. But you can see that we have a ton of trees. Let's glue these saws together. You need to make sure that you glue both of them. And once those are glued, we can turn this thing back on. You can see that it doesn't move right away. However, it does break that one block. It doesn't break the rest of the tree though, but we'll see why that is the case. So as it moves, it's going to go across, breaking all of the trees. And once it reaches the last tree in the section, it breaks all trees connected to it. And once it does that, we are good. I forgot to place the block back, but you will need to obviously manually replant the trees until we get enough funds for a deployer. If your sugarcane grows more than 1 block tall and grows up to this 3rd level, this harvester will not be able to harvest this block of sugarcane. So if that's happening, you just add another barrel and harvester up top there. I'm going to push this back onto our thing and have this run in the background, but that is kind of the gist of micro farms. Now that we have a super basic farm and system here, we need to get to the nether. And this is kind of just a vanilla way to do it. You don't have to do anything fancy. You just need diamonds, obsidian, another portal, and to get to the nether. Because right now we are locked behind all the things that are needed that require brass. And brass requires a blaze burner, which we need to go to the nether to grab a blaze. So once we have all the materials to go to the nether, we just need to make another portal, head in, and we are basically looking for a stronghold like you would in normal vanilla Minecraft. Oh, of course we're in the worst 2 biomes in the world. While you're looking for a stronghold, it is absolutely recommended to get as much quartz as you can, just so that you don't have to go back into the nether and get more. It's not super useful. Redstone is used more, but getting quartz will absolutely help you out in the long run. And once you've found another fortress, all we need to do is find a blaze spawner. And once you have one, just make sure to try to spawn proof it as best you can. Depending on your create mod game, you might be able to, with a minecart contraption, pick up this blaze spawner, which will make it no longer dangerous. As you can see, when we pick it up, this thing no longer turns on, and you can transport this wherever you want, which means you can make a massively OP blaze or XP farm over near where your nether portal is, which is super, super handy. But there's actually a more useful point of this, and that is because we need to get a blaze burner. A blaze burner, we need an empty blaze burner for, which is something that we can make. We need netherrack, but once we've done that and we have a few empty blaze burners, we can use our blaze spawner, and if we right click it, it'll give us a blaze burner. If you have blazes, you can also right click them and you'll get a blaze burner as well. So you can do one or the other. The blaze spawner is much, much easier, so that's probably what I would recommend, but any way that you want to get a blaze burner would be good, and then you can always turn off the spawner again with a lever and the cart assembler. Once we have our blaze burners, we can head back into the overworld, back to our safety of our base, and we can get to making brass for the first time. The recipe for brass is rather simple. We just need copper and zinc in a mixer to make it, which is why in the beginning of the video, I talked about how important copper and zinc both were. Brass is used for so many different things, and having a lot of it is very beneficial. As you can see, we need a mixer and a basin, but we do need a blaze burner underneath that is heated. If you already have a mixer setup, we'll just need to place a blaze burner underneath the basin, as shown in the graphic here. We just have mixer, basin, blaze burner. And now that that's underneath, we need a way to power this thing. In the base create mod, you can only power it with right-clicking it with fuel. Spruce planks is a fuel source, so when you right-click it, you can see, and up at the top, there is a certain amount of time left on this thing. You can feed it anything that you can feed a furnace. If it goes in a furnace, it'll go in a blaze burner. Coal, logs, sticks, fences, anything that is burnable in a furnace will work here, including buckets of lava. They all have different time frames. As you can see, planks are only 15 seconds, but a lava bucket you can see now is 16 minutes and 50 seconds, making it way more useful to use lava. In certain mod packs, you may be able to connect pipes up to blaze burners and pump lava in directly, but those are separate mods and not in the base create mod. Now that we have our burning blaze burner, we can just throw in copper and zinc into this, and it'll start getting mixed into brass. Once you get to a stack of brass, we can see up at the top, that will prevent this thing from making any more, and that's because the output is full. We can go back to automating it like we do with belts or depots, but I'm not going to do that right now just because this is a tutorial. You will likely want to automate this process as much as you can, having space for, like, let's say, putting in copper and zinc into a thing so that it will automatically do it for you. I've never done that really, but you obviously can, and it will probably help. Before we continue with our brass, there is something that I would like to note. It is possible that you have a different mod pack or something that if there's heated brass in a thing, it'll turn into liquid brass. If that's the case, make sure you set the filter here. You can use a list filter and drag brass in from JEI if you don't have it yet. So that's the way to do it if that's happening to you. But now that we have brass, what do we do with it? If you look up in JEI, there are a lot of different things that you can now create from it. If we look at all the things you can actually craft, there's only 3 things: flywheels, brass tunnels, and brass funnels. The rest are just blocks or nuggets of the thing. This doesn't seem that helpful, but there is one thing that brass makes that is even more helpful: brass sheets. With a simple press, you could press brass into brass sheets, which are then used for a ton of different smart contraptions. These smart contraptions are all used to fuel and power more fancy things, which will make it possible to automate stuff. I am going to try my best here to explain everything to you in the ways that I know them. I am so likely to miss something or forget something because this mod has about 100 or 200 items. There's no way I'm going to be able to get to everything. You will need to just play around with stuff is the best way that I can describe it. Look up other tutorials, look up other people doing stuff. I'm only one person and my brain sometimes is stupid. So that's the warning, because now we're getting into potentially more complex stuff than this basic thing. So once we have brass, we need to start with the mechanical crafter. The mechanical crafter requires brass casings, which we know how to make. We've made casings before, but it also requires a thing called an electron tube. These are kind of difficult to make since redstone is not automatable and they require a lot of it. It is 8 redstone dust for every one of these, and you use these pretty frequently. It is at this point where having at least a little bit of redstone is really good. You might want to look into, for your mod pack, depending on what things are available, fully automating a redstone farm. It is partially doable in the base create mod. And let me explain. Redstone can be made from a potion of strength and cinder flour. Both of these things are a little bit difficult to make, but doable. Potion of strength, you can do, you know how to make this now. The cinder flour, however, is not renewable. In the base create mod, netherrack is required to crush into cinder flour, which cannot be renewed. As you can see, these are the only 2 ways to get netherrack. But since mining netherrack is literally the easiest thing in the world, so much easier in fact than getting redstone, for every 1 piece of netherrack you mine, you get 1.5 pieces of cinder flour, meaning you get 1.5 pieces of redstone. I do have a redstone farm on my channel. It assumes that you have some mods installed, but you don't need them if you don't want them. You can just supply your netherrack yourself and then you're good to go. So with that info, let's get into mechanical crafters. We're assuming that you have all the ingredients for this, and we're going to need 24 in total because we're going to be making a kind of interesting shape. Mechanical crafters work in a way where they will connect together based on where you place them. So I'm placing them on this block, which means they'll be facing downward. You can rotate it with a wrench in all the ways around. Clicking on the other sides doesn't do anything. So let's place down a kind of strange shape here. We're going to go 5 blocks tall, maybe 6 blocks tall, and then make a cog-shaped thing on the outside. Notice how all of these arrows are pointing in towards a select point, except for these bottom 3. I'm going to rotate these so that they go over to this one and then out. If I grab a barrel and put it at the end here, what's going to happen here are all of these items all the way from here are going to go like get squished down following their arrows and then get put into this, which is then going to craft the item and put it in the barrel. Crushing wheels do require this system. It actually needs 21 mechanical crafters. I apologize for that. And as you can see, we need a bunch of andesite alloy, planks, and a stone type. When we have those types of things, we're going to just place it in around. And once we have that, we need to power this thing. And you might, and rightfully so, be worried about this because once we connect it to power, you'll see why. You can see that with one large water wheel, we can power all of these, but it is very, very slow. You might have to keep it like that for a little bit until you get a steam engine or additional power. And as it finishes crafting this item, we should see a cogwheel pop up. And once that happens, it'll go into this barrel here. In older versions of the Create mod, you might need to power the mechanical crafter with a lever for it to start the crafting recipe. Since I'm in a newer version, it will do it automatically. But usually once you fill in everything, you would need to flick this lever to have everything go in. But apparently in the new version of the Create mod, it'll automatically do it if it's the correct recipe, as you can see. Now that we have crushing wheels, we can actually get started on fully automating and potentially even increasing our ore production. In order to basically double your ore production, you will need Silk Touch. If you don't have this, it's not as useful, but crushing wheels in and of themselves are still very helpful. As you can see, we can convert iron into crushed ore with a 75% chance of another one, which we can then smelt or even wash into a full iron ingot with a potential chance of redstone. That is super useful, but there are more useful things with crushing wheels. Crushing wheels have better odds and more options for when they're crushing stuff than millstones, which is kind of going to be what I'm comparing it to. It can also process many more items at a time, able to do a stack in crushing at a singular time instead of just one item like a millstone. You can crush things like tuff into certain ingots and things. Again, you can crush netherrack into cinderflower, which is really helpful, and the list goes on. Crushing wheels kind of just let you open up your opportunities to be able to automate more. You want to think as everything in the create mod as something that can be automatable. It might not be 100% automatable, like as we discussed previously Redstone, but everything can be automatable. If you want sand, don't go to a desert and mine sand. Make a cobblestone generator. Crush it into gravel with crushing wheels. Crush that into sand. Then you have an infinite amount of sand. You never have to go mining for sand again, and that's a really easy farm to make. There are so many farms that you can make. There are so many farms that you can use on tutorials on YouTube. I literally have so many. If you want to check those out, you obviously don't need to, but they're a great source of information for things that you can physically automate. JEI is going to be your friend. Everything that a crushing wheel can make, everything that a farm can do will be available here. If you want flint or you want a bunch of, let's say, bricks for a farm, you can get clay, you can crush clay blocks or gravel into clay. There's so many ways that you can do everything. You just have to use your resources. So now that we have crushing wheels, it'll make it a lot easier to automate more things, but that doesn't really help us in getting a house or using all of these other tools. So I've already talked about the mechanical crafters, brass funnels, and these tunnels, but some things I haven't talked about are the mechanical arm. I honestly forget if I talked about the smart chute. I think we have, and the smart observer. The mechanical arm and deployer both require rotational force. You can see that the deployer is actually moving and looks to be doing something. If we hand it an item, it will place the block down in front of you. You can also see, when looking up the recipe for casings, you can have a deployer place it on a stripped log like we do normally when making casings. But instead of you doing it, it can do it on a depot or a belt with the andesite alloy in its hand. This makes it extremely valuable for those types of farms, but also any farm that requires you to break or place blocks. Let's say we put an andesite casing in front of this thing. When looking at it with our goggles on, you can see that the mode is in use. That means it'll try to keep placing blocks. If there's a block in the way, then it won't move anymore. As soon as you break that block, it'll replace it. If you right-click the hand part with a wrench, you can see there's two different hitboxes here. If you right-click the hand part with a wrench, it'll turn it into attack mode. Hovering over it now, you can see that it's a fist and it says attack mode. Unless I'm mistaken, we should see this try to break this block, but maybe that has changed. Anyway, if we were to hand this thing a sword, to get it into attack mode for real and spawn an animal, you could see that it is able to hit it. The deployer will be able to use looting and sweeping edge to its advantage. So if you have a farm that requires manual player killing, like an XP farm, you can do that. The mechanical arm is relatively similar, but it does have some differences. Do you remember how I talked about having to feed this blaze burner by giving it a fuel source? What if instead of doing that, we could automate it? If we right click a target with it, you can see that it is set to deposit items into the blaze burner. It is only able to work with create contraptions, so we can't just use a barrel here. But if instead we had a barrel going out onto a depot, we have the mechanical arm deposit into this. And then if you right click and have it take items from this, you can right click again if you want it to deposit more or take more or whatever, have it take from this, deposit into this, and then we simply power it. You could see that it does get out of range. But if we move this over, taking from there, depositing to there, you could see that it starts to move. It will take an item from there and then put it into our blaze burner here. This is the main way steam engines will be able to get power, and we'll talk about steam engines relatively soon. As for the smart observer, it is not like a normal observer. It does not make a redstone pulse when you place blocks in front of it. It will only make a pulse for the filtered block that you set if it's the filtered block in front of it. You can see that this isn't providing a pulse at all, but the spruce plank is. You can also see that this is powered indefinitely. In some instances of the create mod, the deployer will not move when it's being powered. You can see, however, in my version that this is not the case. It is the case. As soon as it gets back to the front, it will no longer move because it is being powered by the side. Now let's talk about the new redstone options that are introduced. There are plenty of different items each one does a slightly different thing. Let's start off with the pulse timer. As you can probably guess, this is a timer that you can set if you hold it and right click to a certain amount of ticks for it to continuously repeat. Next to the pulse repeater, this is the one with the one singular one. The pulse extender has two, and this will, if we increase the time of this, extend the pulse or delay it to 27 ticks later. You can do this up to an hour, and it will hold this pulse for when an hour comes to pulse once. A pulse extender does kind of the opposite. If you increase this, it will hold the pulse for 30 ticks. If this pulse gets powered again before that 30 ticks is up, it will just never get unpowered. If we go to 14 ticks, you could see very briefly, maybe not, to 11, very briefly it turns off. But if we get closer up to 15, yeah, 13 seems to be the limit where that briefly gets turned off, and then 14, it just stays powered. Redstone links are probably my favorite one. These things are super useful, and they're basically just wireless redstone. There are two filter options here that you can put in any amount of items in either one, and those will determine what signal you're using. An empty one can be used to power an empty one from far away. As we can see, this is now getting that information. If you right click it with a wrench, it will turn it into receive mode. If it's not in receive mode, nothing will happen. So right clicking with a wrench will turn it into receive mode with this satellite dish around it. You cannot power a receive mode thing for it to send it back to this one in either configuration. It needs to be sending and receiving for it to be powered. You can change the format here. So let's say we change it to this. You can see that this no longer gets powered. This would have to be the same one for it to get powered properly. An analog lever is basically a thing that lets you determine the pulse length. So you can see that this now has a power level of 1. We flicked it once. If we flick it 4 more times, 1, 2, 3, 4, you should see that this now has a power level of 5, and this redstone goes out 5 blocks. This isn't super useful, but maybe it is for some of you redstone nerds that are better than me at it. The last two are powered latch and powered toggle latch. You can see the only difference is that the powered latch has a thing on the side. If we put a redstone dust in the middle, you can see that it will connect up to the powered latch here. I just set up this little system that will delay itself 16 ticks and then turn itself off. This means that any power that you receive from the side of it will turn off the thing, basically giving it a T flip-flop, I think is what it's called. This one is kind of similar. However, there's no way for it to turn itself off, or so you may think. If you power it from behind and then power it again, it will turn itself back off. The same is not true for the powered latch. If we remove this, you can see that powering this multiple times does nothing. This can be used along with the pulse repeater and pulse extenders to make a cool redstone clock that is now obsolete due to the pulse timer, but if you're in an older version of the Create mod, it's still a thing. If you get the extender, repeater, extender, and then you just go around in a circle, you can make a clock. You do have to power it from behind though. And all you have to do to extend it is to change that number. One final thing to mention are these things called redstone contacts. They, if you connect it up to another contact, will power themselves. So what you could do is connect this up to a contraption, and when it comes back and connects back up, you can then send this pulse off for the contraption to do something else. In the newest version of the Create mod, there are some updates to how storage works. The item vault, which is an item that has already existed, is basically like a fluid tank. We'll get to fluid tanks in a few minutes, but what this will do is it'll store items for you. The only issue is it's kind of difficult to interact with. You can use funnels or chutes to put items into it or take them out. You can also use a thing called an item hatch, at least in the new versions, that if you right click, it'll put an item in there. We can see if we break the item vault, you can see that the item hatch comes out. The new update also provides some other things, but I'll get to why I'm not covering that in a while. The benefit with item vaults is that alongside other mods, these things can hold a ton of miscellaneous items and are really useful for a large amount of weird storage. They're not as good as drawers for holding large quantities of items, but if you're able to use like refined storage or something and want a bunch of small storage things, and you want to be able to store a bunch of singular items like books or a singular item hatch or something like that, then item vaults are the way to go. Let's talk briefly about contraptions. There are a few more contraption possibilities, including a gantry shaft, which if we put a gantry carriage on it and invert this, it will be able to move the gantry carriage across the way. You can shift click onto the gantry carriage to then invert the direction of it so that if we flip this around, they'll both go in different directions. There's a thing called a clockwork bearing that, when given power, will be able to set up hour, minute, and other hands to work like a clock if you wanted to put one on the side of a large train station or something. There's a thing called a rope pulley that will go up and down, and if you connect it to something like a drill or a whole section of drills glued together, will let you dig the ground out. This can be super useful for mining machines, and I have made my own massive quarry that you can check out. I'll link it in the top right of the screen again, but that is a very late game thing and it's very complicated. So maybe if you're watching this video, do your own testing first to see how it works. But there are much easier contraptions, that the one I've just linked, that will just mine the drills all the way down, and then it'll come back up, and then you can pick it up in a micro contraption and bring it somewhere else. If you, on an item, hold W, it'll let you go to the ponder menu. The ponder menu is basically everything that you need to know to learn about how things work. It'll show you exactly how to use whatever thing you're trying to ponder about, as well as give you some examples about how they work. This is a great resource and definitely the first place I would look if I'm curious about a new item. Elevator pulleys and contraption controls are equally an interesting thing. This will let you basically put an elevator in your base. Contraption controls are a little bit different, and we can explain why in a second. In normal contraptions, let's say this one, for example, all of these things will work at all times, no matter what we do. So as long as this minecart is moving, all of the harvesters, all the saws, all of the drills, if you had those, would be going and mining all of these blocks. Contraption controls, if we put them here, and let's say we put a saw in their thing, this would let us turn on and off saws for the contraption. All we would need to do is turn it into a contraption, power it, and then you can see the saws will no longer do anything. If we try to push this thing, it will go, but the saws will never function. As soon as we turn off the saws and push it once more, the saws will start mining again. There's also another option with contraption controls that will work with elevator pulleys. If you right-click the pulley with the contraption controls in there, it will turn all of these things into what we need. So we're just using 2 redstone contacts here that has now converted this into an elevator contact. This is now a moving contraption, and the contraption controls will tell you what floor you want to go to. So this is floor level 1, floor description, first floor. We can set this one to floor level 2 and second floor. Now we can use the contraption controls, right click it, and bring ourselves down to the first floor. You can also put a lever or other power source on a redstone contact to call the thing upward. So this is super useful if you want an elevator. It's absolutely doable. So just by going up, you can get to the second floor. Now it's time to talk about trains. Trains are pretty complicated. They're not as complicated as the new Create Mod updates, at least in my opinion, but there's a lot that you can do with them. We are going to do the very, very basics, but let's say you wanted some train tracks, you can place them down, and if you click on the track, it will basically give you an option to go all the way along and place a bunch of tracks. But now, how do you get a train? First, we're going to need a train station. You can click this on a track, place down the train station, and then this is the train station. If you want to build a train, you'll have to go into the train station and select create a new track. And now if you have a train casing, you can see a little blue section appear for where the train can be. If we increase the length of the track backwards, and we put down a train casing, you can see that a thing called a bogie appears. I don't know why they're called this. I'm not a train person. You can also see that behind the bogie are more blue spots. These are optional yet possible locations to place more bogies. These bogies need to be connected, however, if you want to make a real train. So I'm going to go all the way along and just connect them like this. This will turn into a contraption, so you will need to glue all these together, but as you can see on the edges of the bogies are little glue bits, so we don't need to do anything crazy with those. In order to make the train actually function, we're going to need first a seat for us to sit in, some controls to control the train while it's driving, and we'll want to glue these together. Once that's done, we have a super basic train. We can assemble the train, and if we get in the seat and click the contraption controls, we can now drive the train. This isn't super useful by itself, but we can do some more to it. Disassembling the train again, we can get item vaults or fluid tanks, put them on the train themselves, and then when the train is built, these will be turned into movable storage. This can help when you're traveling far distances and then you have a farm way far away, like a guardian farm or something like that, that you need a bunch of item vaults to transfer all the items back. And when using a portable storage interface or a portable fluid interface, you can connect it it with a stationary one, and if we rebuild the train and move this around, you should see that those portable storage interfaces connect. Usually if a train were to connect up to the station, those would connect, and if we just had a chute underneath this interface, all the items from the item vault would be dropped out, making it really easy to transport a lot of things. Obviously, you can do the same thing with fluid interfaces. Train tracks do not need to be loaded in. If you're going a million miles that way and the place way down there has your friend and they're loading in that area, they can give you a bunch of items, have the train send itself all the way back, and it'll arrive here with all those items in the expected amount of time to deliver them. The new create mod update, as I will talk about later, is a little bit more complicated, and I'm going to just link a really good tutorial that I've seen, which I would recommend watching. So I am not going to go over all of the new update stuff for trains. Before we move on to steam engines, there is kind of one section of items that I've been ignoring, and those are all of the things made out of copper. Copper and copper casings are mostly used for fluid transport, movement, and otherwise usage. It can make a bunch of different things, including some that are incredibly useful. Let's go over the hose pulley. Let's go over fluid tanks, pipes, and mechanical pumps first. Fluid tanks, if you connect them up in a 2x2, will connect into a larger fluid tank. The same is true for a 3x3. You can then increase the height of this thing to increase the capacity. If, let's say, we have a source of lava over here and we want to get it to the fluid tank, we would have to connect it up with pipes. This won't let the lava flow, however, because there isn't a way to push it anywhere. So right now it's just a connection. If we put in a mechanical pump and make sure the arrows are pointing in the direction that we want to go, we can connect this up to power. You could right click fluid pipes to turn them into glass to make sure that they're moving, but now you could see this fluid tank is filling up. The faster the mechanical pump is powered, the faster this increases. You can also set filters to these things. This is a smart fluid pipe, and if we set a filter to, let's say, water, no lava will get past. Something interesting was happening. I don't know if this was a bug, but when I had the fluid pipe here, it still let lava through. So instead, I moved it to behind the mechanical pump, setting it to water, and now we can see, if we right click this, there is no lava flowing through it. The second we switch this over to lava, it starts filling up again. This is really useful for mixing potions and stuff when you want just the strength potion to be taken out, but not the awkward potion. You can also obviously set potions as the filter, so that's what you would do if you wanted to do a potion bottle. Bottle O XP also works in here if you want to filter out XP. Now that we have this out of the way, let's get to the hose pulley. This is probably the most useful block in very specific circumstances. See, there is a kind of rule or a fundamental truth about the create universe that with very large bodies of water, hose pulleys will consider them infinite. If we place down a hose pulley and connect it up to some sort of power, it will start going downward. If it's not going downward, that's because the power is backwards and it's already going up. And once it's at the top, it won't move anymore because it's already up there. But if we bring it down, we can see that it will go into the liquid underneath. And once it reaches the bottom, we may see that it says it's an infinite source. We might have to, however, wait a second and have this go into a fluid tank for now and power it for a second. Yes, once it powers and pulls in its first source of water, you can see that this has switched to a bottomless supply. When there are over 10,000 sources of any liquid in the game, the hose pulley will consider that source infinite. It has to be above 10,000 sources. So if you have 10,001, it'll work. If you have exactly 10,000, it will start pulling from those sources. Obviously, this is a massive ocean of water, so of course it's a bottomless supply. But you could do the same thing with lava. You could do it in the nether, you could do it in a cave deep underground, you could just make a big hole, you could do all those things. The other use for this thing is, if we bring this back up and we were to put it, let's bring it up one more, back up to the surface. If we wanted to fill up water to this level, we could pump water from here into the hose pulley and it would place in sources on all of those areas. Obviously, we only had one source block in here, but if you had enough, you could fill it more in. There is a max amount for this, and it is 10,000 blocks. If you place in 10,000 blocks manually, then the hose pulley will say, no more, it's an infinite source. This doesn't actually mean that it's an infinite source because it's a little bit broken, so you will have to place a few more if you want to make an infinite source from scratch. But with that, let's get to making a steam engine. A steam engine uses these fluid tanks, these blaze burners, lava, which you might want to get an infinite source of with a hose pulley, all to make a ton of stress units. I have a full in-depth video on steam engines. It's a little bit older, so it's not as good as this one probably is going to be, but I do have a tutorial for a really good steam engine there that I enjoy quite a bit, but I'll give you the basic rundown. Putting blaze burners down on the ground with a bit of fluid tanks will not do anything. You need the legitimate block called a steam engine for it to convert itself into a boiler. A boiler, when hovering over it with the engineer's goggles, gives you some information about it. That information includes the size, heat, and water. You can see that both size and heat are both at 1 green tick while water is at 1 red tick. That is because we're not actually pumping any water into this thing. If we grab a pipe and stuff and we make an infinite water source, you can make an infinite water source much easier than a lava source. You don't need to do the whole hose pulley thing in an ocean. You can just have a mechanical pump with a normal infinite source. And if you put this down, it will then feed in water. You can see some information about the boiler as well. The status says that it's passive, which means these blaze burners are not active, but they're still giving it a little bit of heat. You can also see that we now have a bunch of green bars of water, but not a lot of green bars of size or heat, which means even though we have plenty of water, we're still only generating the minimum amount that a steam engine can make. You could also see that this amount is 2048, which is 4 times what can be made from a large water wheel. So at a minimum, this little contraption here makes more stress units than 4 large water wheels. You could increase the boiler size by just building it taller. The max height is 4 blocks tall. If you want to increase the size, because as you can see, we're only at 4 out of that big number, you will need to make this into a 3x3. Once it is a 3x3, you can see the size has increased dramatically, which also means we're able to increase the height of this. You could keep going and going and going up until a point. You could see that the size has now maxed out, and building any higher doesn't do anything. You don't need to obviously build this high. If you want, you can build 4 blocks tall, and then you'll have a level 9 steam engine, which is kind of the maximum that you can get in mid to early game. We will talk about the max size steam engine, which generates, I think, upwards of 300,000 stress units. But now that we have the size and the water for this, we need heat. And conveniently, I have lava right next to me, but in order to get heat for this thing, we need to give all of these blaze burners lava. You can also do other burning things, but since lava burns for 16 minutes, it is easily the best one. It is also pretty easy to optimize, but you could make a coal or charcoal farm that would work wonders. You might be able to notice when looking at the boiler, now that we have 4 blaze burners, our heat level is moved up to 4. If we want to increase it anymore, we'll have to put in many more, which is what I'm gonna do. So let's put lava in each one of these guys, and now we can see that we have a boiler status level 9. Our heat and size are all the way up to 9. Our water's a little bit more, but that's okay. And we have 147,000 stress units available. It says that it's via 2 steam engines, which if we put shafts across from, you can see that these guys start spinning. Now that those are in, let's connect them up with some chain drives and we can check their stress units. As you can see, they're only generating 32,000 stress units. That is because if we hover over the steam engine itself, the kinetic stress capacity is 16,000, which means in order to use all 147,000 stress units that this thing is generating, we need way more steam engines. Now that we have those and try to connect them all up, we should see, I did 9 in total, that we now have the 147,000 stress units that this steam engine can produce at a given time, with all of these only doing 16,000. Now that we have this much stress units, we can basically power everything we need at whatever speed we want. If you have a billion farms, you might need to make more stress units with more steam engines, but for now that's fine. What I would heavily recommend right now, if you're not building the one from my tutorial, is that you set up a way to automate these blaze burners. If these turn off, your whole machine and farms and everything will stop. As I mentioned previously, the best way to do this is with a mechanical arm. You can have it deposit into each one of these blaze burners so that whenever they get empty, this thing will refill it immediately. That does come at a cost, however. To do it with lava is a little bit more complicated, but even so, you need an infinite source of whatever fuel you're using. Charcoal may be the best early game, but I really like lava a lot more since it is used in a lot more things, and you'll need it eventually anyway. If you don't have it yet though, make an easy charcoal farm with the tree farm system that we showed earlier, and it'll work. Now that we have a steam engine, we need a workshop. I mentioned briefly that you could have made a pretty fancy workshop here, and if you're doing that, just keep improving it. Keep building on it, build everything that you may think you need. This can include upgrading this to now have a haunting campfire, because this will now allow us to make like soul sand from sand or a bunch of other things. Bringing stuff from the steam engine and having it power power things at any bit of speed might become a bit of a hassle. And there are a lot of issues with these cog systems and them breaking if overstressed. So instead of doing this messy system, there is another option. There's an item called the rotation speed controller. It has a speedometer thing on it that will let you choose your target speed. If we place a power source on this side, then we can choose whatever speed we want this thing to spin at, and you can see that on the other side it's spinning the same speed. That is because we need a large cog on top of this rotation speed controller. You could see that it then connects, and it is now going the speed that we decide. You could change it from clockwise to counterclockwise, and you can change the speed to whatever suits your needs. This thing is very expensive though, at least in the mid to early game, because it requires a precision mechanism. Precision mechanism is something that has an 80% chance of completion and otherwise will give you a random scrap, but you need to go through a gold sheet and with deployers only, put a cog, large cog, and iron nugget on this gold sheet in order 5 times. So this does mean that even if you were trying your best to never automate something, you need to automate this. This is something that is very doable to do by hand, but it's so tedious that it's just easier to automate it. There are a bunch of really cool farms for this, and I'm going to go over them shortly. But I wanted to bring that up before we got to the workshop. The workshop is something that I'm a huge fan of. I didn't make it in my first Create Mod series, and that was a huge mistake. It made it really hard to automate things that I didn't have a standalone farm for, and it made it really difficult for me to get stuff done without going through a farm, if that makes sense. In the Createaholic series that I'm playing at the moment, I'm on episode 18. Please check that out. It's such a good series. It's so fun. I have a workshop, and I've recently released a full workshop tutorial that you can just download and paste into your world. We'll get to how you do that in a second. The workshop should include everything that you may ever need to function without needing additional automation or it being exponentially more annoying. Depending on the mods that you have, if you have additional ones, like let's say mechanism, you may need to change up the workshop from what I'm going to show you because there might be better or easier ways to do that in different mods. To start our foray into workshops, I think it might be worth downloading the one that I made in my tutorial video and showing you how to set up a schematic, because even though they're very daunting, they're actually quite easy to figure out. It'll also make it possible for you to just paste this into whatever world you're playing in if you decide to do that. And if not, I will show you around everything that it is so that you can copy the ideas while still making it your own. So over on my channel, and I've linked this in the top right of the thing, let's go to the Ultimate Create Shop. Anyway, in this video, I show you how to set up the schematic, but we're going to go over it very briefly and what a schematic is. In the description, we have schematics for both Create 5.0 and 6.0 that'll bring you to createmod.com. This is a site run by Ubersui. He is a legend in the Create Mod community. This site is amazing. You can see that I have a bunch of other farms in here that you can check out if you wish, but all we have to do is download this NBT file, head over to Minecraft, and then get a schematic table. A schematic table is really cheap to make. It's really simple. And once we place that in your world, you should have something that is, for you, empty. If you open the folder, it'll bring up a folder system with a schematics file. Going to our downloads, we're just going to grab the NBT file that we downloaded, throw it into our schematics folder. Heading back to Minecraft now, if we refresh the page, we can see that we now have the Create 6.0 Ultimate Starter House. If we throw in an empty schematic in here, which is just paper and some light blue dye, hit the check mark, that will load all the way through, downloading the schematic file into a thing that we can configure and place into our world. You can see that when you're holding the schematic file, you can place it in anywhere that you want. If you right click, you can see that we now have a translucent kind of building here, which is the schematic file that I made. This can be transferred into any world that you'd like, and it's pretty useful. You can see up at the bottom, you can scroll between different things. There's moving between the X and the Y axis. If you hold Shift and then scroll wheel, you'll be able to move that in either X or Z. Switching to moving in the Y direction, you can move it up or down. You can rechange the position. So by right clicking again under position, you can rotate it, or you could flip it. Since I'm in creative, I have a print button. You will not have that if you're in survival. Instead, we're going to need to grab something called a Schematicannon. With the Schematicannon, this has an interesting UI. Once you've placed in the schematic, you can shift click it in and it'll be brought to this spot. You can see that it tells you that, oh, we're out of gunpowder. That means we need to go get some. If we put in a bunch of gunpowder, you can see that it loads in this section here, and it also shows you what you have. You have 400 shots with a backup of 25,000 if you have a stack. If you don't have a stack, then you just have 400 shots left. If we were to try to play this, it immediately says, oh, we're missing items. Well, how do I get items into this thing? We're going to need to put down a bunch of inventories around this thing so that if we were to grab, let's say, a dirt block and put it in here, it will place it. But this is a horrible way to get all the items we need for the schematic. Instead, we can grab either a book or a clipboard, both work, shift click it in. You can see place a clipboard or book here, and it'll print a checklist for your schematic. You can see that we have 23 pages, all of the items that we need to get. This is a ton of stuff to get, but for a fully completed workshop that honestly I think is the best one that I've seen. I haven't looked at too many, but I'm biased. I don't think that's too bad of a deal. You might want to also stop this because when you put items in, it'll just keep throwing them out. And I'd much rather, at least in my opinion, wait until the end and then hit play. Andesite's on our list, and let's say we put in enough andesite to satiate this just one stack of andesite that we need. If we put that back in the material checklist, you can see that it is gone from the front page and it is brought all the way to the back where there's now andesite, but it's checked off, telling you that you already have it created. You'll then just need to follow all of these and for the rest of the items in here. And once you have that, your Schematicannon and the book will be fully empty. All of these will be checked and you'll be good to start the farm. I'm using something called a creative crate, which basically lets me use any item from the game. And then if we check over here, there are some other configuration options that I at least recommend to look at. There are 4 different ways to do it. You can don't replace solid blocks, replace solid with solid, replace solid with any, and replace solid with empty. All of these do different things and you can hold shift for each of them. But this basically says, if there's grass in the way, don't replace it with anything. If there's grass in the way, replace it with other full blocks. So that means redstone will not replace a full block, but other things will. This one will replace solid with any, so now redstone or other non-full blocks will work, and then replace solid with empty will mean even air is included. Skip missing blocks is an option that I sometimes like to turn on depending on how easy or difficult the schematic is. If there's a thing like a creative motor in there, it will not be able to be placed. So you will have to turn this on for those types of builds, and protecting block entities you should probably always do. With that though, we can place this in, and if you wanted to, you can increase the speed of a Schematicannon by going to create, configure, and then gameplay, schematics, Schematicannon, Schematicannon delay, drop it to 1, save, and now it's fast. Obviously, if you're in a server or you don't like cheating, maybe don't do this, but for me, I'm doing a tutorial. That's my job. And as you can see, this is just getting placed in. This thing is super fast. I'm killing a horse. I feel really bad. That's okay. But as this is getting placed in, you can just do other stuff. As long as this is loaded into the world, you're good. You just have to make sure that you have all the items and that you have enough gunpowder. When the Schematicannon's done, it will have a little ding, and when you right click it, it'll say finished with the empty schematic here. Now that we have the workshop in front of us, let me go over all the things that I would recommend you having in your base. Obviously, an enchanting, disenchanting, and anvil setup. You'll want crops of some sort, some decoration, of course, and a place to store animals. And that's just on the outside. On the inside, you need a source for power generation. I super recommend a steam engine. You'll need plenty of storage, the same washing, smoking, lava-ing, and haunting system that we have and we have already made over at our original system. You will want a compacting area, a pressing area, item draining, a mixing station with water available to be put in, and if you wish, a blaze burner in this spot here, which actually was removed for whatever reason. You'll need a saw and a mechanical crafting system. Here's one of the precision mechanism farms that I talked about briefly. If you feed it in gold ingots from here and you give these cogs, large cogs, and nuggets, it will go through and do everything by itself. If you want to see this running, check out the main warehouse video. We have an ore processing system that can potentially get you XP if you wish. We have a andesite, copper, and brass casings farm right here where you just empty in logs to this spot and the alloy to there. We have a cog kind of crafting machine and your general crushing wheels. So those are all the things that I would recommend for a warehouse type thing. Once you have all that, you can kind of just get started with building whatever base, whatever thing, whatever machines, whatever farms you want to do. At this point, you're just back to Minecraft. This isn't the end of whatever game you're playing. This is kind of just the start. If you've seen my Create-a-Holics playthrough, you'll see that I made this on episode 2. Since then, I have made an auto enchanting and XP farm, a massive church where I can do a bunch of villager trading automatically with some other mods. I've made multiple silos to house all of my steam engines to generate 700,000 stress units. I've made an ore processing facility, an automatic ore farm. I've made a cobblestone, stone, gravel, and sand generator. I've made an andesite, diorite, and granite farm. I've made a train station to hook up to all the other people's bases. There's so much that you can do, and I've not even started in the Create-a-Holics, basically. eventually. So set yourself a goal. Set yourself something that you want to accomplish in the Create mod, whether it's automating everything in the game. You can automate all of the andesite age. You can automate all of the brass age. Everything is possible. And speaking of automating everything, I mentioned that this is not the end. This is probably mid-game, if I were to guess. There is an end game, and it's a factory that generates everything that you would ever need so that you don't have to resource gather anything for your next build, for your next contraption. No matter what, you'll be good. And I have been leaving out probably the most important thing in the Create mod, the new Create 6.0 update. This update is absolutely insane and wild. There is so much new happening with it. It is so complicated, and I'm not going to explain it in this video. I am linking up on the top right of the screen right now the, in my opinion, best Create 6.0 tutorial that I've seen. It taught me so much about it, and I don't think I could do any better, which is why I'm not going to. This is really only useful for the late game of the Create mod. I kind of don't see a reason why you would want to do this before then, but to give you a taste of what you can do in the mid-late game, closer to late game thing of the Create mod, you're looking at this. This is a fully automated system that will run on its own. It'll request items on its own. It'll stock up these item vaults for storage all on its own, where we can access it through this. All of these items have been generated without me getting anything, without me crafting anything. Everything was fully automated. We're just using 3 farms, a cobblestone generator, a tree farm, and a kelp farm. Everything else is created from the steam engine powering it and all of the things that you can do in the Create mod. There are plenty of new items called frog ports or chain conveyors that will transport a bunch of items and things called packages around your whole base. If you make a massive factory, you can fill it with these chain drives, having packages fly above you as you're walking around your factory, looking at all of the contraptions that you can make, looking at your factory board to see what things are still being generated and which are done. As for us here, everything here is done, and this is just one of the 3 ages of the Create mod. There's still copper and brass that I have yet to make a farm for, but we're going to. And you can do so much more. You could make a factory for all the types of copper blocks. You could do copper stairs, copper casings, copper whatever. And depending on the mods you have, you can maybe even automate it from the beginning. You might not even need to go get copper. If you have a copper farm that you can make, you could do it. So I really hope this video has quelled some of the fears with the Create mod, that it has helped you at least the best that I could have in getting you off the ground and running to start playing the Create mod, to start innovating, to start automating. I appreciate you all watching. If you're new here, leave a like, check out all of my other videos. There's so much good information there, and I will see you in the next video.